Okay, well, Emma Askew, thank you very much for joining us today. It'd be great if we could start with telling us a bit about your background and how you are here today as a sort of leading eco-influencer.
Thank you. So I'm Emma Askew. I'm the founder of Earth Minutes, which was founded last year as an environmental communication service. So my main background is in environmental research. That's really where my love for the environment stemmed from, particularly within kind of my educational career through my geography degree. And then I went into filmmaking and communication, and that's where my scientific communication really blossomed. And I feel that in terms of my environmental action and how I can help in terms of the climate crisis and really building change across society, my place is definitely within scientific communication. And that's why I've built Earth Minutes. And that's why I'm kind of leading that as my new venture. And in terms of communication, obviously social media is a huge platform for it. And it's obviously become even more prominent over the last couple of years, especially over the last year with COVID, it being the main communication medium. And that's where I've started to really develop and work into people's roles as influencers. I definitely, in terms of my space and my pages, I have a community that I enjoy to educate, especially surrounding a lot of the environmental topics that I've been working on or I feel particularly passionate about. But this is where my, I guess, development within eco-influencers and sustainable influencers and my interest for bettering how you could go about that has really stemmed from.
Okay. And you're quite active on Instagram, YouTube, any other platforms or?
Particularly YouTube and Instagram, and that's mainly through Earth Minutes. So mainly through the platform that I have built and developed, mainly because we can get different voices across. It doesn't just have to be my voice, but Instagram predominantly in terms of audience and community in terms of site.
And what would you say the sort of the main differences between a sort of traditional influencer you might find on Instagram versus an eco-influencer?
That's a good question. I think fundamentally it's probably down to number one, sustainability interests and sustainability values, as well as ethics and ethical values. And that's mainly in terms of consideration of how people consume, particularly on Instagram. Obviously, there's now a whole new kind of shop platform to Instagram where you can sell products, buy products, etc. And so I think consumerism is the main aspect and the main difference between a mainstream influencer and maybe more so a sustainable influencer. However, what's really interesting is that we have to still label more so an environmentally focused influencer as sustainable or green. And I think the fundamental problem is that that is the case. It's separated, and we've got mainstream celebrities and influencers and people labeling themselves as those sustainable green influencers. So it kind of divides those communities when in reality, there should be some sort of fundamental balance and foundation to apply those values across different work and different interests. And that's the same, going even into the education system. People who have environmental interests do geography. So for me, it's just starting to unwind this idea and this concept of having the environment as an interest. It's a fundament to everybody's life. It affects everybody. And that's kind of where the conversation of how this divide should start to mold together.
Okay. From the sort of consumer perspective, and obviously the people that you're interacting with, are you starting to see any kind of confusion over the use of terms, eco, green, sustainability? Is it all starting to mean the same thing, or what's your impression?
Yes, I definitely think there's a huge amount of confusion, particularly for somebody that I study this day in, day out. I'm particularly interested in educating myself around environmental issues, and I still get really confused about terminologies across brands, across organizations, especially sustainability. Obviously there's a huge different variety of definitions for that particular word, but green is also one that there's a lot of assumptions attached to them. And a lot of the time when people see, particularly within fashion, clothing brands or particular ranges that have the word sustainable or green attached to it, it normally makes you feel like it's a better option and you feel like a good person for going for it. But really getting into the nitty gritty of what does that mean, to what extent is it sustainable or green, or another word, ethical, in terms of kind of the social impact, who's making it. There's always kind of that miscommunication. And obviously on Instagram, with marketing and advertising, those words are thrown around at mass at the moment, and kind of working into how you can really depict what it means for that brand or that organization is key. And a lot of people feel very intimidated by it, don't really know where to start, and don't know how to do that.
Okay. What's your approach to creating content? Do you try to balance the positive with the negative, or do you have a different sort of philosophy around it?
I definitely think it's a balance. I think that's a great way to put it, because a lot of our content creation in formats of video, graphics, reels, and so on, we try and keep it as upbeat and fast-paced and really mobilizing solutions, making sure that people feel empowered by it. Otherwise, ultimately, really adding in that negative spin really drives panic, drives frustration. And we find that's very short-term kind of pulse of energy. You don't really develop it into long-term action. You don't develop it into long-term interests. And the whole kind of aspect of the climate crisis and how we're going to be able to drive action surrounding that, it's going to be long-term. It's going to be a long-term process. As much as it is an emergency and we need to act now, it's something that we're going to have to change a lot of our lifestyle behaviors. It's going to be a lot of long-term adaptations from the individual, as well as obviously large-scale corporations. So I think making sure that there's that balance of that actionable solution-based spin, which is ultimately the positive, the really optimistic and powerful side, as well as keeping it realistic. And a lot of the challenges and topics that we cover aren't fundamentally positive. A lot of them include biodiversity loss and climate change damage to communities. So we have to make sure that it's realistic whilst putting it in perspective of now what's next? Let's keep up the pressure.
Okay, thank you. As we're seeing more and more, brands labeling, products and services as being green or sustainable or fully recyclable, apply as you please. Is it becoming harder and more complicated to be positioned as an eco-influencer in light of this development?
Yes, I think in terms of distinguishing greenwashing, it's becoming particularly really complicated. And in terms of how you go about that, there's a few ways to really question brands as well as question yourself in terms of what you need. And for me, it's just getting down to the basics of, even if it is a sustainable product, so particularly sustainable flip-flops, for example, whether it's a recycled plastic, it's asking yourself the question of, do you need that product? Do you actually need it right now? Will it benefit your life? Making sure that you still keep the conscious consumerism in place, as well as understanding the brand's values or organization values, because that will really determine whether that product is going to be necessary or be an addition over kind of adding to that overconsumption mindset and overconsumption ability that a lot of brands still have to sell products, still have to sell their vision and their brand. So it's just making sure that you as an individual can distinguish that, as well as for influencers. I work with quite a few influencers, and they get gifted a lot of products, whether it's new sustainable hairbrushes or something else. And there's a lot of different varieties of whether that individual wants or needs that product. And I think in terms of an influencer mindset, you need to work out not only if that product is going to benefit you and if you actually believe in the need and the actual use of that product, but whether it's actually going to benefit your audience as well. You know, is it worth a particularly over expensive product? Is it a nice item or is it a necessity? Just finding the difference between that privilege, sustainability, and also that, again, overconsumption of items and products in general.
It's a very good answer, but yeah, it sounds like it's getting more complicated. I mean, do you have a particular sort of checklist that you try to follow, or is there anything you find useful when it's, you know, part of your decision-making process?
Yeah, this is a particular conversation that has been evolving with a lot of people, a lot of content creators and influencers, especially in the Instagram space. There's a few recommendations that I have, and that I definitely feel that I'm starting to speak more to other influencers, content creators, as well as brands about. And a few of them, and one particularly top one on my list, would be the carbon footprint. So recognizing that, just, you know, if a brand offsets your carbon footprint, that's great, but it's a lazy environmentalist point of view. You need to limit carbon emissions from source. We all do within our individual lifestyles, but brands should also be limiting carbon from source. So this can be from transport emissions, which is a common one, whether it's a brand that you're working with in the US, but you're based in the UK. Those carbon emissions in terms of that product, how can you minimize that? You know, maybe it's not going to be worth sending those gifted products, rather than the outlook of, oh, but we can just offset that. I think that's going to be more impactful, both in terms of environmental positive influence, as well as in terms of actually shifting this gifted over consumerism mindset kind of out the picture as well. Another one is touching on that, those words of sustainability and green. I think if you really question a brand, ask whether they have sustainability reports, ask for their progress. It really differentiates the difference between brands who speak about it and brands who do something about it. So that can be whether they've got a particular initiative in place with renewable energy, within electric vehicles for their van drivers, for deliveries. There's particular efforts that brands will make and can prove and can state to you if you ask. But the brands who don't have anything to show, whether it's in stats or research or future plans, tends to mean that they're not actually serious about doing something about it. And that's where that sustainability and green word use tends to be more of a marketing situation than an actual logistical input into their company or business. And then just the last one as well is kind of from more of a social and ethical point of view. A lot of influencers and brands on Instagram kind of, let me rephrase that. A lot of influencers on Instagram in particular, the ones who work with brands and have get the opportunity to work with brands, are particularly privileged within the space. So if you ask a brand whether they're fundamentally intersectional, you know, have they got a diverse workforce? Do they work with diverse influencers, ages, races, genders? It makes sure that you have that kind of core value of inclusivity from the start, and brands again will be able to show you what they're doing, who they're also including. And it's just questioning yourself, and particularly in my position as a young white privileged influencer and content creator, you know, why should I be chosen, and have they been given other people opportunities? Especially because I work with a lot of people on Earth Minutes that are very, very talented content creators. And it's just making sure that those spaces are inclusive and brands are making sure of that, rather than, again, reassuring you via verbal communications and actually doing anything about it.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think you've actually answered my next question as well with with that. So thank you. What's your view on the kind of eco-influencer landscape as it's evolved? You know, how is it changing at the moment?
Well, it probably is a good place to start with kind of the definition of influencer, because I mean, people are terrified of the word influencer. People don't like the word influencer. And, you know, the amount of people on Instagram that are content creators or educators that avoid the word influencer at all costs, including myself, it's because it's really been attached to this huge kind of celebrity status of a huge amount of followers. And I think in terms of addressing how influencers, or what influencers are, it's anybody who has influence. It's someone that is speaking to a mass of people that could be inspiring them or could be influencing what they buy, what they do. So even if people as educators, as content creators might not want to be called influencers, they fundamentally are. And that's the element of responsibility that must be considered. And I think in terms of large scale influencers, that world is a totally different world in comparison to smaller content creators that are very conscious and very aware of the brand partnerships, who they're working with, how products are getting to them, who their products are made by. And in comparison to big influencers, that especially again in the fashion world, that influencer platform for them has totally rescaped their ability to promote fashion. It's extremely influential, especially on a visual site like Instagram, showing their outfits, showing your clothes. It's an extremely great way to promote brands and to you know, really make people want to wear what you're wearing, buy what you're buying. So with big influencers, the fast fashion world has very quickly, over the last, I would say even the last year, has quickly taken that on board. And a lot of influencers, big influencers, are representing fast fashion brands. And that's where this landscape has become extremely powerful. It's evolving fast fashion. Fast fashion is still massively growing because of that. Obviously, there's huge sustainability challenges as well as ethical challenges with that. And a lot of the time, there's also a lot of greenwashing associated with these collaborations. So over the last couple of years, especially over the last year, that's where I think the world of influencers have changed. They've got a lot of power, especially within the fashion industry, whether it's fast fashion or sustainable fashion, but the fast fashion world has become pretty predominant.
Okay. So I think while we've both seen plenty of positives in the development of content creators on social media, the communities that's creating around them, and some constructive kind of conversation and changes. On the flip side, is there a downside to what's sort of happening on the influencer side?
Yeah, I think there's a huge challenge with doing Instagram business kind of side of things. So influencer ads, paid partnerships, gifted products, doing that sustainably is a huge challenge, because a lot of the time you're saying no. A lot of the time you're even turning away brands that have great values, but maybe you don't believe in that product yourself. It's not something of your interest. And obviously that's this very kind of similar landscape to the maybe mainstream influencer. There's a lot of brands that want to be really present on social media, but with the sustainability value, it's even more restricted and even more challenging. It makes you have to really question who you're working with. And in terms of the difference between maybe a more sustainably focused influencer compared to more of a mainstream influencer, the main kind of differing value is, I've lost my thought. That's a really good point.
It's
rephrase it. The main differing value between a kind of a smaller scale, more sustainably focused influencer and a more mainstream influencer is the fact that as a sustainably focused influencer, you'll be building a partnership. It's a product that you're particularly working alongside with. It benefits your life. You understand where it's being made, how it's getting to you, what impact it's having ethically and on a sustainability scale. Whilst as a mainstream influencer, I mean, there's a huge amount of money involved. And again, that touches on the fast fashion industry. Those transactions are gigantic and life-changing amounts. But they're also kind of one transactional. Then they don't build these partnerships. So I guess that's even kind of a social point of view as well. I feel that there's a lot of money surrounding marketing, especially that aren't related to sustainability in terms of core values. And a lot of those marketing processes are that one transaction, that one process, and then it moves on to the next. It's a very kind of fast-paced, brand-based process. Whilst in terms of sustainability and how that challenges you as an individual, is it feels that business and business opportunities could be more limited by that. Maybe in terms of how many brands you can take on, who you can take on in terms of partnerships, as well as maybe the amounts that could be available. But in terms of kind of sustainability influencers, it's definitely important to say that there is more business opportunity than it first seems. It shouldn't put people off from choosing to do more sustainable approaches and using more sustainable frameworks. And I think ultimately there'll be something that also will encourage that and drive that further. There should be something that will keep that as a foundation. Whilst at the moment, in terms of business and business opportunity, as well as the kind of fast-paced craziness of business with mainstream influencers, that's definitely not achievable or not a focus, I guess, as well, of a sustainability influencer.
Yeah, I think you're right. From what I'm sort of seeing at the moment, it's definitely not as applicable as you mentioned. People almost want to see it as a partnership or take a kind of longer term view with a collaboration rather than a sort of short-term hit, basically. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And I think finally, almost kind of wrapping up, some of those points. What should brands, consider if they want to work with more environmentally minded content creators?
Yeah, I think this is such an important point, because as much as the responsibility should be put on influencers, especially large scale influencers, about who they're working with, what they promote, how they promote it, it's also a huge responsibility for the brand to lead that change. And a lot of brands I've been working with recently have, been very, very transparent about how products are made, what they're made out of, packaging that also comes with the products that they're improving or not happy with yet, as well as opportunities to offset if that's the last resort, if there's no other option in terms of travel, getting the products to you. So there's definitely a huge opportunity for brands to push this. And the more that they, ask influencers, ask people in terms of what they're doing, what they're getting involved with, whether the influencers have recommendations about how they can do it more sustainably, having that transparency from the get-go is key, really, to build those partnerships in both successful business terms, but also in success terms of sustainability and ethical values, keeping them core and developing them to be even better. With businesses that are particularly focused on starting their sustainability journey, I think it's even more important to be transparent, because coming to a sustainability influencer with a really great product, but then it arriving in a particularly unsustainable format with single-use plastics or unrecyclable packaging, there's obviously going to be questions, and a lot of people are going to kind of undermine the value of sustainability of that product at that point. So being transparent from the start, really laying out how they're doing it, why they're doing their certain plans, I think is really important to gain that trust from both the influencer as well as the influencer, to gain that trust from that brand. Obviously, everyone's very hyper aware of greenwashing. It's absolutely everywhere. It's become a huge ploy for marketing, again, particularly within the fashion industry, sustainability ranges, recycled ranges that actually aren't that impactful, you know, clothing that has potentially 3% recycled bottles in, and the rest of it is polyester, which is a plastic in itself. So it's just trying to gain that trust from both sides. And I definitely know that the more sustainability influencers question it and are concerned about it, the more that they feel they can't trust brands. They're very worried about how to not get tricked into greenwashing, basically. So it's just making sure that as much as the influencers should be asking questions and should be curious about all levels of production and how their product is being made and sold, the business also needs to provide that supporting information to make sure that you can have that foundation of understanding as well as trust from the get-go.
Well, it's been really interesting. I mean, you know, I've even been making notes as we've been going along. But yeah, Emma, thank you very much for your time.